Greetings, dear viewers of the channel. Today our guest is Vitalii Kuprii. We will discuss some very important topics for you. Hello, Vitalii.
Good afternoon.
Tell me, you were active in Ukrainian politics, a member of parliament in the previous term, and then somehow you disappeared from politics and the media. I would say, what is the reason you stepped away from politics as far as I understood and observed, and then suddenly burst back into it? You have more than 1 million followers on Facebook, if I'm not mistaken. You actively write posts. Tell us about that.
I will soon have about 1,900,000. The number has increased, of course, since I took a more active public stance. I'll explain why now, but I want to say that in 2019, unfortunately, I helped Zelensky not just to become president, but to take the reins of power, you could say. I submitted a draft resolution to the Verkhovna Rada, and thanks to my draft resolution, Zelensky was able to dissolve the parliament, essentially usurping power. Having been in power, I somehow felt that something was wrong here. I didn't vote for Zelensky. Since I was a presidential candidate myself, I didn't campaign for Zelensky. But in the parliament, I helped him and created a cross-party parliamentary group there that supports him. I had certain election promises of my own. I wanted to bring order in the fight against corruption. I hoped that we would cooperate and put criminals behind bars. Those who at that time, well, it's an old story from the Poroshenko regime, but they simply refused to cooperate in any way. All my reports about the crimes of the previous regime I wrote to Ivan Bakanov, and they ended up in the trash bin. I was very disappointed. For several months, I didn't know what to do at all. I just kept watching and following this. In 2019 and later, when the so-called Oman agreements took place, that was the worst situation. I went into strong opposition to Zelensky, and basically I still remained in the public sphere. I made my own posts, talked to people, communicated, and I realized that with this regime, we would either have a war or Ukraine would be surrendered. We can talk a lot about Oman because I was one of the first, maybe the first, who stated this on the Nash TV channel. It was a statement, I think it was January 2020. No one knew yet because I was informed that there would be a meeting between Zelensky and Patrushev at the Russian embassy through Ukraine's military intelligence channel. At that time, I still had some connections and I decided to make it public. So I went into opposition, started criticizing, but you are absolutely right. It was more of a non-political activity, even though I am the leader of a party myself. I head a party called Resolute. I became a military man. I went into the military field right away. It was 2020. It was the Bucha district. Back then it was called the Inter-District Irpin-Bucha Military Commissariat. I was in charge of a security company. Then I immediately signed a reservist contract, basically remaining in civilian life, but I was very active. You can check, doing shooting practice, coordination, and participating in military training camps. And I know for sure how Ukraine was being surrendered. I myself opened the envelopes during combat coordination exercises 6 months before the invasion, where the capture of Hostomel Airport was described. I knew all of this. At that time, I was a senior lieutenant, got promoted to captain, and started doing, well, legislative work. With the leadership, the command of the territorial defense of Ukraine, not the battalion of Bucha district, but of Ukraine. At one time, I was an advisor on these legislative matters to Bari Hilevich, Mr. Bari Hilevich, who later headed the general staff. So these were quite high positions. And from the first days of the invasion, I immediately came to military unit A1155, the command. This is Yuri Halushka, a brigadier general, whom Zelensky is now relentlessly trying to imprison for allegedly having surrendered something there. Some positions in the Kharkiv region, near Hovchansk, and I served until I suffered spinal injuries. And then I was discharged. It was 2022, and from that moment on. Of course, when I was in the military, I didn't take an active political stance. I didn't express my opinions. Although there were some things related to strengthening Ukraine's defense capability. And then from 2022, 2023, I started to criticize, well, not just criticize, but to expose things, which is what I do, to expose corruption schemes, to defend people's rights. I've led a human rights organization for 20 years and made all this public. And so I kept making things public until 2023, when I directly exposed the crimes of those appointed by Zelensky's decrees and orders, the heads of the military administration. Embezzlement of reconstruction funds, embezzlement of humanitarian aid. Mostly it was Hostomel, but not only Hostomel. Kyiv region, now Deputy Prime Minister Kuleba, he was also involved there. How they sold access through the Shliach system, sold these opportunities to leave. Then officials left with access to classified information and didn't return. That is, I discovered all this and made it public. And so in 2023, I was one of the first people they decided to forcibly mobilize personally. What they did was destroy all my military records, where I served, and my medical documentation. I became like a ghost, you know, like a phantom, and they came for me. And there are a few videos on TikTok. One has 1.2 million, another 1.7 million, and another 2 million views. How they did it in the building of the Hostomel Settlement Military Administration, where I was holding a protest against embezzlement during Reconstruction, and that moment when they couldn't force me onto a bus back then. Since people supported me publicly and journalists were involved, they lacked the experience at that time to retaliate harshly. And most importantly, everyone knew me, everyone knew, even the police knew, and the police just stepped back 10 steps because my son was serving in the police at that time. And when I was in the Verkhovna Rada, I was the deputy head of the law enforcement committee overseeing law enforcement agencies, and the police did not support them. I think they're not from draft office staff. I think they're SBU agents directed by the president's office. It was Yermak, and they were pretty bold, and they tried. No one knew what happened next. I never claimed the right to a deferment, but my father-in-law was disabled, already deceased. Of the first group, my mother was disabled and dependent, and I claimed these rights, but they didn't want to grant me a deferment. We had to hire a lawyer, a woman, so that the man wouldn't be detained at the military enlistment office. Let me remind you, this was in April 2023, so it's not now, it was 3 years ago. And at that moment, the lawyer was very strong. She said, show me Kupriy's case, the military one, and there was nothing. She said, listen, there's only your hometown, Kamyanske, where you got your lieutenant rank 20 years ago. Everything else was destroyed. It became clear to me. At that time, taking advantage of the opportunity to cross the border because of my mother and her need for treatment, I stayed abroad. I am currently abroad. And publicly, I started to get involved powerfully when the trafficking began. Because this is the only person who gave me some hope, since I see what's happening under Biden. That sometimes they give us something, sometimes they don't, just so we don't die and aren't destroyed, and they'll keep this eternal conflict going. I like Trump's position, which says, I want to bring peace, and I didn't see anything about him being some kind of Putin's agent. And just look at the sanctions he imposed. He even punished Lukashenko. Even Biden couldn't do a lot of what Trump did. Venezuela, look at the situation in Syria, Armenia, even with Belarus. Look at how he is pulling Lukashenko away from Putin. That's why I supported him, and I started making public statements. But this so-called forced roundup was gaining momentum, and I could no longer stand aside. I am the head of a human rights organization. I identified about 12 or 13 articles of the Constitution of Ukraine, not just laws, but the Constitution itself, the main law, that are currently being violated in this shameful process. And I just can't take it anymore. There is no rule of law here. The law enforcement system doesn't work. There are no judges. In this situation, I decided to start by making these facts public. And if you look, right away, people started unfollowing me. I had 1,700,000 followers and immediately 100,000 left. And I've seen all sorts of things there, that it's an information psychological operation, that I'm a Russian agent, and people wrote all kinds of classic stuff to me. Yes, yes, classic. They accused me of wanting to bring order, to have proper mobilization. I was one of the people who helped with mobilization, creating volunteer territorial community units. In the territorial defense, there were 100,000 of us and 800 of these units. People joined at the beginning of the war. You see, with an idea, I don't know, with inspiration, with the desire to defeat the enemy and, well, to bring peace with victory. And Zelensky ignored all of this. And I started to highlight it, and now you can see my posts, some of which have reached many, many millions of views. I comment on these facts, of course, I explain them. You can see that the bot farm that used to work against me is no longer active on these posts, because now it's just impossible for them. This fact has already come to light. It's impossible to hide it now. They are currently working against me. You can also see when I expose abuses in the armed forces, in the Brovdi armed forces, they launch so-called batches of 300 drones. They disappear in an unknown direction and supposedly fly towards Moscow. But in reality, they could have been used to destroy enemy warehouses, some infrastructure sites at the front to help. It seems to me that there's a very shady story with these Brovdi guys, with all of them. Then I'm now strongly criticizing these volunteers, pseudo-volunteers like Sternenko and Prytula. A satellite that no one has seen, there are no documents, this satellite doesn't exist. We saw when the US intelligence support disappeared, we saw that everything was gone, meaning that these scammers in power just latched onto this feeding trough. Even some military personnel are making millions for themselves. For example, right now they're showing one of the current Da Vinci commanders. He's sitting there with a watch worth 7,000 euros or so, and cars, new ones. Apartments, new ones in elite complexes, Karasivtsi. I personally know this Yevhen Karashyats from the Maidan, from the Revolution of Dignity. He says, oh, 100,000 have died. That's nothing. It's no big deal. We need to keep going and dying. And what was stolen? 100 million. That's nothing. We have billions. It makes me sad to see all this. And it's exactly these kinds of posts that expose this whole gang that surrounded us now. The gang wants war and keeps pushing for it endlessly. Right now, a bot farm is working against me. I delete comments very often. Well, it's just swearing. There's nothing else there. They can't explain why Zelensky sent over 200 of the best specialists in shooting down drones. And now we see the burning Bernardine Monastery in Lviv, a UNESCO heritage site. We see explosions in Zaporizhia. In other words, they've exposed our defenses. And under these posts, they're getting heated and they're fighting against me, trying to. But people here are watching. There are a lot of views, a lot of likes, because people understand that I'm telling the truth. And my task now is to explain to people the way out of this situation. And the only way out is to demand Zelensky's resignation. That's it, resignation, you understand. Go out into the streets if needed. We're just sitting around. I wonder why people are afraid to do this. The territorial recruitment centers have intimidated men, but women aren't demanding it for some reason. This doesn't mean to give up positions there at the front. It doesn't mean to surrender or sign a surrender agreement. I won't say a word about that at all. On the contrary, I would strengthen our positions by properly eliminating corrupt defense schemes, establishing order in the armed forces, and conducting proper mobilization with motivation. Putin would say something like, they're done for, we can't defeat them, we need to make some agreements and negotiate. That's my plan. But this can only happen through Zelensky's resignation, and there is no power vacuum here. And you know, I'm curious, no one in parliament, no one supports this practical idea that power should transfer to parliament, since we have a parliamentary presidential republic. And the section of the Constitution is written in such a way that if the 5-year term ends as provided in Article 106 of the Constitution, then power transfers to the Speaker to re-elect, to choose a new government, to change the heads of law enforcement agencies, to restore order. I could have headed the Prosecutor General's office. That was the conversation back then with Zelensky's team, that I could work in the Prosecutor General's office.
A small step back, and now we will touch on this parliamentary crisis. I want to ask you, did you personally talk to Zelensky back then?
No, I personally am well acquainted with Andriy Boden since we worked together with Mr. Kolomoisky, and I was. Let's put it this way, he was a deputy, not a deputy, but a supervisor of certain legal matters. We met with him in Switzerland in Kolomoisky's office. It was 2016, 2017. These trips were regular because I was Ihor Valeriovich's deputy in the Ukrop party. This is public information. He headed the audit commission. I was his deputy, so we are familiar with party matters. Through Bodan, let's say, with Zelensky's team, and also during the elections. I was a candidate. Well, I realized that I was a spoiler candidate. I just didn't want Petro Poroshenko, who is just like Zelensky, to usurp power in the same way, and he was the one who introduced martial law. In the same way, if it weren't for Avakov and the People's Front Party, who didn't let him have it for 60 days, but only for 30, Poroshenko embarrassed himself. Without elections, he would have seized power the same way. That's why I opposed him. A technical candidate, I had many court cases with him because he was registered illegally, and I handed them over. All my quotas for the commissions, every candidate has certain commission heads, deputy heads of election commissions. I gave them to Zelensky through Alexander Konyenko. He is now the deputy speaker.
Yes, the deputy speaker.
Yes, so I had this kind of contact with them, and also some of my colleagues who supported me had access to Bakanov. They communicated, but Bakanov was absolutely zero, a complete nobody, because he didn't understand anything about politics at all. So there was no conversation.
Tell me, when did you stop communicating with Kolomoisky? How do you assess the situation around him now? People are just curious.
Around 2018, I made it public that I disagreed with certain positions regarding the Ukra party. I left the party in the summer of 2018. After that, I haven't met with him, just exchanged messages a few times. And that was only to finalize the fact that I left. Well, there were certain things I didn't like there, especially with the arrival of Zelensky, his company, and Kolomoisky's circle. For example, there was something about Russian electricity. They were manipulating Centenergo. There was this Heros, and that same deputy was helping. But back then, I was more focused on military matters, not so much on that. But I'll tell you this, private bank back then in the past, and what it's about now. There was huge pressure from the United States, NABU, everyone saying that the funds were withdrawn, stolen. That's private bank. It would never have gone bankrupt. It was a successful bank. It was profitable until the very end. It had no losses. And Kolomoisky simply carried out, how should I put it, an anti-raiding scheme there. He always did that. Someone was always taking something from him. He's a professional. Here, I think maybe Hennedy Corbin was giving him some advice. Before, they just had money. They distributed it among their own companies. But if no one had touched private bank, there wouldn't have been any debts. Let me tell you right away what happened with private bank. This so-called nationalization of theirs is absolutely illegal. No matter what, let those judges not tell me about those court decisions being ordered. There was no law at that time, and there still isn't. How can you just confiscate like that? Any bank, any business asset can simply be seized in a corporate raid. They did it illegally by a cabinet of ministers decree. And that's why I was on good terms with Kolomoisky at that time, because he was opposing Poroshenko's regime, and we shared the same views on Poroshenko. That's a separate story. We can talk about it, but I didn't like what he started doing when Zelensky came to power. I can only give my personal opinions about that. But the fact that he's behind bars now, well, excuse me, I think Pinchik deserves to be behind bars even more. Right now, he's involved in more schemes than Kolomoisky. Akhmetov, you see, I'm not even talking about Zelensky's inner circle. The ones who need to be put in jail now are the new oligarchs, really new oligarchs, who combine power with illegal enrichment. That's why I think he's not in jail for what he actually did. And basically, he'll get out sooner or later, 100%. And I know, personally, Valerovich is a very good player. I know he doesn't forgive things like that.
Okay, going back to the situation in the country and the parliamentary crisis, I want to ask you about this from the very beginning. Just your area of expertise, a specialized question about the impeachment mechanism. Is there any real chance impeachment proceedings could start against Zelensky? Or as a lawyer, do you think that's unrealistic?
It's impossible to complete. There's no longer a quorum. The number of deputies has already decreased. By how many? By 60 or so. There's not even enough members of the Verkhovna Rada to finish this. But it needs to be started politically. It needs to be started. And this will be the beginning of the impeachment procedure. And this will already be a new coalition. And this will mean that the parliament is taking power and responsibility upon itself. And Zelensky is already gone to show even his Western partners who flatter him, kiss him, hug him, and give billions without controlling where it goes. And when it turns out that this money was stolen, they still give him more, you see, to make up for it. That's why we need a parliament, no matter what it's like. Even, look, under Yanukovych, everyone thought, well, very strongly, and the parliament, those guys, his party was the party of regions, they had a good coalition. But as soon as Yanukovych fled, The situation changed immediately. A new majority was found right away. They immediately elected, I forgot, Turchinov. Turchinov, yes, Turchinov was elected as acting president. And this shows that deputies, they can do it if they want to. I think that right now they're not decisive only because they're being threatened with criminal cases. And by the way, I was against it, and I still am. They lifted the so-called immunity from the deputies. They shouldn't have done that. It's a populist move.
Never any.
There was never any immunity, never in my life. There was a special procedure for bringing a member of parliament to criminal responsibility, which involved hearings in the regulations committee and a vote in the chamber. You see, and when you listen to all this and they come, we saw Poroshenko, how many times they wanted to put deputies in jail and nothing ever worked out for them. Because either the criminal case was improperly formed, the evidence was collected illegally or something else, and it falls apart in court. But politically, it was very important to have such a process. And I could have been put in jail about 10 times on some fabricated criminal cases, but they didn't do it. Because this case will go to the regulations committee, people will listen, everyone will be watching, and the deputy won't be able to be jailed. That's why I felt protected. I spoke harshly from the podium of the Verkhovna Rada with criticism, and I voted. By the way, I was probably the only one who voted. I voted against amending the constitution regarding NATO and the EU. I'm the only one. You can check. I think I'm the only one. You can't amend the constitution under martial law conditions. And while there was no official martial law, the conditions existed. And by the way, my legal dissertation on this topic was defended in record time. And secondly, what does NATO have to do with it? You see, the Constitution needs to be simplified. It should be something like in the United States of America. Basic rights, including the right to revolt, the people's right to rise up against dictatorship. And so I spoke out against it, and no one said anything to me about it. That was my opinion. And now try it. Well, now there's a work to rule strike going on. They either don't show up or disappear because these deputies don't want to vote against private entrepreneurs. It's actually the best reform that has ever happened in the history of Ukraine's economy. And they don't want to anymore after what happened with NATO. Because the anti-corruption prosecutor's office, you remember those laws back and forth, and all the rookie deputies, well, let it be. But let a new majority form already. We need a new coalition.
Vitalik, look, I'll just say this for the people so we don't get ahead of ourselves. We're talking with you. By Ukrainian time, overnight from the 24th to the 25th, the situation is that today, around the Verkhovna Rada, cops are already gathering. These Zolkins, Petrovs, Ivanovs are threatening the people's deputies. There's all this commotion. The deputies don't want to vote for this bill, supposedly for the IMF, about raising taxes, which we're talking about, like VAT for sole proprietors. In this regard, you remember in 2000, Kuchma pulled off this scheme with Medvedchuk when the deputies, for the only time in history, gathered in the Ukrainian House and voted for a new one, elected a speaker. And that's how they did it back then. At that time, as far as I understand, it was unconstitutional, but now it's absolutely legal. If they're afraid to go to the parliament building, they can gather in another building, elect another speaker instead of going through the impeachment procedure. And considering that we have a parliamentary presidential republic, they could partially take power into their own hands and finally put up some resistance to Zelensky to create some kind of counterbalance to him.
In the histories of many countries, there are constitutional crises where it's impossible to get out of the crisis by using the current legislation. That's why it's provided for. I'm saying I would change our constitution so that such an option would already be written in, but even now it's possible. Yes, why not? Even our own revolutions of dignity, the Orange Revolution, the third round, remember the revote, well, there have been many things in history. That would be public consensus. The main thing is that the people of Ukraine support it, and I'm sure they would. Everyone is already tired of them. This terrorism organized by the draft officers and the police, and not just the draft officers and the police. I call them Zetushki. These are civilians, gangs, bandits who don't want to serve in the armed forces of Ukraine. They're just being hired. On Zelensky's orders, with the Greenway, they were given such an opportunity. The same recruitment offices hire them, and there I know, either they catch someone, take money, people pay them off, they make money for themselves, or they bring people in. And for that, they're left alone. And maybe they even have some kind of share in it later on. By the way, a group of people was recently arrested there. An Odessa group, something with mother in the name. I was among the first to write about it over a year ago. So, you join a public organization that's close to the recruitment office and you pay dues there, I don't remember, maybe $500 a month or something like that, and nobody bothers you and they give you the right to catch, to grab people. Without the police, without the recruitment office, they just twist their arms. I have it on video, in balaclavas, without any identification marks. Big young guys grab people, throw them, and where do they take these people? To the recruitment office. So either from the car, then they let them go for money. It was also on video when they brought a person. Surveillance cameras recorded it. The wife came out, paid the money, and took him away. So that's what's being created. And when we live outside the law in our situation, we have to fight the same way. We shouldn't appeal to the law anymore. I don't advise anyone to watch anymore. A lot of people write to me asking, please advise us. How can we protect our rights? There's no way anymore. We're in anarchy. We're without laws, without laws. We need to gather and get public support from the people. And I think everyone supports it, about stopping the chaos that's happening and not give up under any circumstances. Like I said, they're taking advantage of it. She says it's all the Russians, it's all a conspiracy, troublemakers. Poroshenko also had a plan like that. It's all a standard situation, and maybe because of this, some people will finally wake up. But this needs to be done, and first of all, I think it should be done by the deputies. If the deputies do it, then Zelensky just won't have a chance.
Tell me, without mentioning any last names, of course, without last names, are you currently in contact with any of the current members of parliament?
I do have some communication, but why without last names? I support her, I write to her, but I'm sad that no one is taking such a strong stance. Even that very same Alexei Honcharenko, I've known him for a long time. I sent it to him. He's the head of the commission. 3 months ago, I sent him a complaint, 27 pages long, about how the Hostomel airport was surrendered. Who's responsible for the destruction of the plane? Maria. This will all be under Russian rule. I later described this in detail, just provided the documents. Some of my documents were taken and published by the BBC. I wanted all these issues to be considered. Why was Ukraine surrendered? I live in Hostomel myself, by the way. My house is there. I know everything about how it all happened. And also the violation of my rights as a serviceman. I was a serviceman, my rights were violated. So this complaint has been lying around for 3 months in violation of all possible laws regarding citizens' appeals. And even such opposition members don't consider it. You see, pseudo-opposition members. When you read the European Solidarity Party, the Batkivshchina Party, Kovzavodna, has anyone even raised the issue that Zelensky's term ended in 2024 for 2 years? No one brought it up. Everyone considers him legitimate.
I'm just joking. The Holos faction doesn't need elections. The Poroshenko faction doesn't need elections. I see it as them understanding that if elections are announced now, they simply won't make it into parliament anymore. Of course, now they don't have as much power as before, or as much as Zelensky, but still they have access to the gravy train. They have a privileged position, and basically it's convenient for them. The head of the Central Election Commission said there won't be elections soon. We've agreed, and I believe Konyenko was brought in. We reached a consensus. Who is we? You and the so-called opposition? So you reached a consensus on usurping power, on the usurpation of power. People have no chance to influence what happens in the country.
Turns out that's true, but no one is there to say it. Unfortunately, we thought the previous parliament was weak, but this one is even worse. It's just a disaster, really. Well, unfortunately, that's how it is.
We touched on the topic of elections in general, and if I understood correctly, you support or supported holding both presidential and parliamentary elections as scheduled.
Yes, I thought they should be held, but I have a procedure that I would like to follow. Well, first of all, whether it's martial law or not, the Constitution doesn't prohibit it, but the laws could have been adjusted for martial law. How to vote, how to ensure the right to be elected, those were the main questions. I'm absolutely not against using electronic means in this situation, including smartphones and identification, but I don't trust the Ukrainian authorities. That's why I made it public, and it was very well received by the people. So let's actually delegate the creation of this program, which will be, well, I don't know, this application on the smartphone, which will allow people to run for office and nominate themselves online. no matter where you are as a Ukrainian, no matter where you are as a citizen of Ukraine. And let's also entrust the voting process and ask the international community, maybe some serious company, well, Microsoft, for example. Bill Gates would want to do that, I see, and go down in history for it. Elon Musk. You can ask anyone. You can get big names who won't sell out for a loaf of bread or, I don't know, for some drone contract. They will create this program under international supervision. This is an unprecedented situation. Yes, nothing like this has happened in Ukraine since World War II, but it was possible to get out of this situation, and the vote counting should be monitored. We're not independent anyway, you understand. Our sovereignty only exists on paper. We have to get money sent from Europe or America. That's it. We're bankrupt. That's all.
Let's admit it.
And then we could have held these elections online. No, if someone doesn't want to vote online, they can come to the polling station. But most people now, millions, 7, 8, however many are abroad, and those who remain in Ukraine, most would vote. And definitely this could have been a way out of this situation. But about Zelensky, I'll say it again, even if we don't hold elections, even if we don't, he had until the 20th when I registered the resolution for him, May 19th or 20th, 2019, the 20th, the 21st. Hand over the keys to the office, disband the entire president's office. It's not needed, absolutely not needed. No one understands what it does. He once promised to leave this building to the children.
Do you remember?
A liar, and give it to the parliament. And let the parliament do what I said and replace the government with a national unity government. And there are people who are ready to work. I could work, no problem. If he just hands over the keys, there will be no control over law enforcement or the system. Then everything will start. His persecution will begin. They will already start putting him in prison for what he has done. And then it's already for life. He already has so much against him. That's why I'm in favor of elections. It would be in such a format with the help of some serious, reputable international companies, countries, the UN, I don't know, anyone, just to get out of the political crisis. And the second thing is that Zelensky is a usurper.
Tell me, how do you see the current situation? There were negotiations just now. Another round over the weekend. Well, not trilateral, but bilateral. But still, you probably have some information after all this. Overall, how do you assess the current situation, your attitude towards territorial compromise, a way out of the situation regarding ending the war? What's your position?
I've been saying this for a long time, too. Zelensky can't agree to give up any territories. The constitution doesn't allow it. They'd carry him out feet first. He can't do it. But before, neither Putin nor anyone else raised such questions. Why did these questions about giving up part of Donbass or withdrawing our troops even come up? Do you remember how long Trump has been around? A year and a half already, almost a year and 3 months. Do you remember? When Trump was just elected and he didn't have any authority yet? It was the beginning of December 2024. Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, says that he wants to become a negotiator in the process. I talked to everyone about this. I told everyone that's why both Putin and Trump came out in support of a Christmas truce.
Do you remember?
What's so bad about that? Tell me, if someone comes to you and says, let's have a Christmas truce, let's not kill anyone for a few days. I've got a full 3 years, that's some kind of rotation. Well, it's a normal thing. What did Zelensky say? They said, well, you're an idiot. Orban said it openly, just like that. It just doesn't make sense. So Zelensky resisted then in the Oval Office. Do you remember what he did afterwards, the stunt he pulled there under the influence of drugs or something else? I don't know who egged him on. And Putin, watching all this, faced no consequences for it. Nothing, basically. And with that minerals agreement, remember how much they twisted and turned things, and they signed the agreement illegally. Because all of this concerns national interests a lot. Only the president signs such international agreements. The prime minister can't handle this. I've already explained the legal side of this issue. And here they tricked the Americans. And when all this piled up and Trump didn't show enough strength, I think he should have shown it. Putin thought that now I would be there too and let them pressure this Zelensky. So here Trump showed weakness. If things had been done properly back then, there would have been a mayor a long time ago. You understand? They have all the information, where they siphon the money off, where they steal things. They tried to get to Mindich a little through Nabu, but Nabu got kicked out when that wiretap was installed in the apartment. Whether it was Boholyubov or someone else, this was after the Oval Office. You understand? There was an order given, send Nabu after them, and that's how it was. But it took a long time, and it was done really well. It seemed like the US had nothing to do with it, but it was definitely with Trump's help. But it took a long time. He opens it and finds Schiffer and everything else inside. Lift the sanctions, at least against one person who is close to Zelensky. And that's it. And he promises, and then everything will be much easier. But of course, no surrender. If I were in that position, if I were president and Trump had just been elected, I would come and say, please help make peace. We're doing everything we can. The territorial issue wasn't raised. It could have been resolved then, but later, step by step, it became a zugzwang, a stalemate, and things kept getting worse and worse. Now, I don't know how to sort it out. If Zelensky is incompetent, if he can't do it, if he doesn't have the strength, and the question now is to fight for another 10 or 20 years, that would definitely mean the destruction of our state. We won't be able to finish the war, so he has to resign. And then our collective mind, our political leaders, all of us will gather. All of us will think about how to get out of this situation. But without Trump's help, definitely, without the USA, we won't be able to end the war.
Of course, Vitalii, tell us, we haven't discussed the so-called referendum issue. According to my information, the USA supports holding that very referendum, which supposedly legalizes the withdrawal of troops. It's just that the word surrender, to surrender Donbass, isn't really used here. That's just how our press presents it. They exaggerate everything. So what is the legal status of such a referendum?
I don't remember at all if there was ever a proper referendum. That was back in Kuchma's days a long time ago, and now I don't think it's possible. But for me, well, the toughest compromise that could be made right now, if Ukraine was strong, showed results, and Putin agreed. You see, we are weak, and they're putting pressure on us because there's terrible corruption. Basically, the FSB's manual for dividing the country with this forced roundup into vans is being carried out. That's how it was laid out for us, yes, and now Zelensky is fueling it. And the war is beneficial both for Putin and for Zelensky, and both of them are fueling it. If he saw that everything here, for example, the economy had already been put on a war footing in time, if the state of war had been declared. It's clear when it comes to goods, we seem to have no enemy. We don't have an enemy now. It's just terrible. And if Zelensky were a president, to put it correctly, consistent, didn't allow stealing, cracked down on everyone, did all that, well, let's say he had such popular support and he had a motivated army, then we would have had different negotiation opportunities, definitely, and no one would have pressured us. That's the first thing. And second, well, let's see what kind of compromise can there be now to withdraw the troops. In principle, it's possible. In principle, yes, maybe Russia will withdraw, they will withdraw. Once something was done in Zolote or somewhere else, well, maybe they'll return to the issue of special status. Maybe allow paperwork to be done in Russian, whatever they want there. This Russia, well, these aren't such terrible issues if we've already gotten into such trouble, but definitely under Ukrainian leadership, under the Ukrainian state. But Putin could sell it to himself somehow, that he achieved something, that the Russian-speaking population or those with Russian roots are respected. Well, something like that. They know what to say in that regard. So after all, well, and about special status, what else could Russia say? See, we told them back in 2014 that this needed to be done, and now we're pressing them. Yes, in Minsk, yes. Like the Minsk agreements, well, since it has come to this, it's not us who brought the situation to this point.
People forget, that's the impression I get. When a public figure speaks, people think that it's me or you who brought about this situation and are offering some bad solutions. But it was specific people who led to this situation. Zelensky, Yermak, all of this, the prime ministers and so on, it's up to them to deal with it, and the responsibility is on them. Vitalii, an important question. Do you remember this case? By the way, that's a very good argument. About Orban, who offered himself as a kind of envoy, a mediator for a truce, Zelensky immediately dismissed him. This label of Orban being pro-Russian, as it's being used now, that he's Putin's agent. Of course, what are we going to talk to him about later? Remember, I'm very much against the communists, but I'm just stating a fact. China also proposed its own action plan. During the war, some important person sent by Xi Jinping, I think even a minister or deputy minister, came over. I read it. Everyone read that plan. It's certainly not perfect, but there's nothing terrible in it either. Zelensky rejects it. A month ago, he said there should be more Chinese involvement in peace negotiations. So China proposed a plan. You said it's a bad plan. It's a plan entirely for Russia. His opinion keeps changing like that. And as you mentioned, the Oval Office, that's a really high-profile story. I've noticed one pattern for myself. Ukrainian society has been so dumbed down by propaganda. You know, in any other country, this would be a disgrace, a shame, and people would say, why do we need such a president? This is a nightmare. Let's change something. Let's do something. This isn't normal. But here, people seem to get energized by it. He's being rude. He's putting Ukraine and its people at risk, and yet many people seem to be happy about it. God, you know what I call this? Putin's so-called moral values, but reversed. They've got people hooked on this sense of greatness. We were rude to Trump, we're great. But that's not greatness. It's the opposite.
Well, I think, every nation has the government it deserves. I really think people here have been seriously brainwashed and they just don't understand. And like I said, when I started supporting Trump's position and Orban was mediating, it was just awful. People unsubscribed. There were terrible comments, everything. Now that's not happening anymore. Gradually, opinions are changing, and that's our work, your work and mine. If we're not on the front lines, then at least working somewhere for a successful Ukraine, for a peaceful Ukraine, and conveying these ideas to people. That's exactly what I'm doing now, and gradually, very slowly, but it's happening. The real problem isn't even in Ukraine itself, but abroad. I see the people who left here at demonstrations, who shows up and how they support Zelensky. I was with several communities, Ivan, Alev in Spain, in some other countries with Ukrainians. I met with, refugees, non-refugees, and it's very easy for them to criticize. So they either get some help from the government, or they found a good job, or they still have some sponsorship where they're given some housing or certain benefits. And fight, you go and fight, you understand? And when I hear this, especially from men who support Zelensky, who are for continuing the war until the last Ukrainian, the question arises, why aren't you there? I'm against it. I don't want anyone else to die. And if we do it on our own, we already see that for 4 years, we haven't been able to defeat this terrible monster, our northern neighbor. We need to find compromise solutions and somehow live. There have been many such cases in history. The same happened with Finland, and you can mention Cyprus too if you want. It was divided for a certain period, and now one part is developing quite well. So I think we will come to this as well. But as I said, the further it goes, the worse it gets. And is Zelensky the reason for this?
Tell me now, basically, this is already fairly open information. Before, it was presented as some kind of insider info, some information here, some information there. Zelensky gathered his inner circle some time ago, about a month ago, and said, no peace, no compromise, we will fight for another 2 or 3 years. Consider mobilization. This was directed at the new defense minister, Fedorov. He also questioned how Parliament will continue operating like this for another 2 or 3 years, so that he, roughly speaking, would do what Zelensky needs. I watch, yes, from a distance, I'm forced to, but still I watch Ukraine. I don't know. A forecast for 6 months from now, the state of society, the psychological state, which many people also don't think about. I'm not even mentioning the losses, infrastructure, or what happened in Lviv last night with the strikes. And that's in 6 months, but in 23 years, as he says, how do you even assess what will happen to Ukraine next if Zelensky continues in the same way as now?
Well, I've already made a statement. He's leading us to ruin the whole country, every last Ukrainian. It's a terrible situation, and someone has to do something. Either people need to go out and protest, mostly, of course, women. Now, both the deputies and others can do something, but no one is fighting anymore. I believe that after all these years, it's impossible. Look, just see who they're grabbing now. I'm just over 50, toothless, with serious illnesses. And those who are sent as cannon fodder, there are such assault regiments of Silski. They're rightly called penal regiments. The situation there is terrible. Now they're just being thrown in. And these Guliai guys, there was just a liberation of several territories there. And I have video evidence, but I can't make it public right now because the people who sent it to me are still there, and they would just be killed for it. How the bodies are lying in the tree lines, and as the commander said, not to pick them up, so that they would just disappear without a trace.
It means
that with these assaults, they recaptured 2 tree lines. There, well, I don't know, maybe a few square kilometers. They just lost a huge number of people and to their families. They don't report that people have died, and they are considered missing in action. And sorry, they're rotting in the tree lines, just rotting because we captured these territories. That's a different story. If the Russians were advancing and there, they take those bodies, yes, they want to hand them over to us if they're advancing, but ours don't take them. You know this situation. That's why I think there's nowhere else to go. We have to make some compromises, of course, but in 2 or 3 years, what else would he say to the deputies? He needs to show off, somehow convince them that they still need to vote for all his whims, whatever he has. But you see, he still didn't succeed. Even this intimidation, saying that deputies will be sent to the front, I don't know if it's a joke or not, but still, first of all, it won't work because you need to pass a law, the deputies won't vote for it, you need to change the legislation. And secondly, some people even got offended, and the result was the opposite. And I think that he is gradually losing control over the parliament, step by step, and sooner or later the parliament will switch sides. I'm saying that it's in the air. I'm sure of it.
it's the perfect situation right now because he said all that. There are these insider reports about peace negotiations, and those propagandists are attacking the deputies. Right now, there's an important vote. It's the perfect moment. We'll see what happens. But I wasn't a people's deputy, but I have the impression that in the end, it will all come down to a bag of money for everyone. In other words, they'll be bought off with dollars.
Well, look, that's true, but how much is it? The latest NABU investigations about these off-the-books cash salaries, and even Koryavchenko is mentioned there, yes.
And he was summoned for questioning by NABU. For how much? Me? Well, yes.
Yeah, he's hiding in Spain or wherever his house is and maybe already bought several properties there illegally. They say they're undeclared, registered under others' names through front men. And the more investigations like this there are, the more the deputies will think, well, now it's a bag, right? But what if there's some kind of listening device in that bag and that's it, they'll catch me. I think people are already being more cautious, a bit afraid. Yes, when it comes to outright bribery, in this case, I support NABU. It seems to me that this only happened with the support of the FBI and the support of the United States of America. Otherwise, they would never have gone for such attacks. They did nothing. Look, before Trump came, nobody did anything. And here there is support, maybe not even support, but probably a kick in the pants, as they say. So where is the result?
In your opinion, why is there such a demand from the people, such a heated situation? The tension in society is extremely high, extremely high. It's like with this Midas operation, they're not pushing it through. I mean, everyone knows that Yermak and Zelensky are on the tapes, but they don't seem to take the next step, such an important one, like the first step was. The whole society exploded. Why aren't they moving forward?
I think it's like the FBI not insisting since they don't want to argue with the security service after someone was already detained. Recently, the security service of Ukraine in the Sumy region, a detective. I even wrote about it, grabbed some popcorn and said I'd watch what happens next. And then they talked about something, I don't know what, and let him go. Well, probably there is, but right now the security service of Ukraine is actually headed by Poklada. He's a general, if you know who that is. I personally had contact with him a few times when he was in charge of counterintelligence, and he didn't see the enemies in Zelensky's circle. Naumov, one of his own, the one who's being pursued now, and I think now he's acted preemptively. They also brought Kristenko there, put a bag over his head. Why is Zelensky now going to the Emirates, taking our best soldiers off the front line? Maybe it's because he's guilty of something there. Yeah, they gave the person to him without a trial, extradition, or anything. They handed over a member of parliament from OPZZH, hoping that through him they could put pressure on NABU people and stop Operation Midas. Maybe it's working since Kristenko isn't testifying and we don't hear anything about him. How is he? He'll probably give any kind of testimony. And another step in the confrontation with the arrests, Zabahadyuk. I think that if the time comes and the US, the FBI says go ahead, then Yermak will be there, everyone will be there. For now, I think it's just Iran a little bit. Well, you understand that this is now, I think, the most sensitive topic for Trump. With so much already fired there and direct involvement, the military contingent is arriving, about 5,000. I think maybe they'll do a ground operation on the island, the Strait of Hormuz. So I think that until the situation with Iran is resolved, we're still somewhere in the background.
Vitali, tell me, we're discussing elections and the need for a new person, but how are people reacting? They think that only those who appear in social surveys and on television will be on the political stage. Major media outlets, which are naturally controlled by certain people and certain agendas. And now we have a so-called opposition leader, Zaluzhny. Poroshenko, of course, considers himself the leader of the opposition. What's your take on how realistic these figures are? Can they actually claim any positions, like the presidency, or realistically lead a faction in parliament?
Well, I don't consider any of these people you've mentioned, and honestly, I don't even know the opposition. They're not really opposition at all. Of course, when we see the list of candidates running in Ukraine, people usually vote by choosing the lesser evil. Well, that's what we'll do. We'll see. Of course, if it's Zelensky versus Zaluzhny, I'll support Zaluzhny. Yes, Zaluzhny is a military man. He's a person who will probably follow some orders, maybe from MI6 from the UK. Maybe he'll listen to the US. Yes, it will be a certain loss of sovereignty, which, well, in fact, doesn't really exist right now. But he's not a lawless person. He won't do what our little cocaine guy does. You can see that sometimes it's impossible to understand what's going on in his head. He can do anything, punish anyone for no reason. They were after me too, lured me out under Yanukovych, and there were 2 assassination attempts on my life. I started to figure things out. I used to have very good security. I can tell when someone is setting a trap for you. And in the winter of 2023, they lured me to a separate place for a meeting with certain people. There, the heads of a public organization were offering some positions. I felt that it was probably the security service working to take me out. Well, Poklada deals with such matters, and at that time I involved Tsutskoridze. You know, he's one of the leaders of the national police. They worked, tracked it down, and they weren't in cahoots. The police weren't in cahoots with the security service, and that issue was resolved. That's one reason I left the country. These unknown calls, unknown conversations, well, you know, I already keep my nose to the wind. So they're capable of anything. This gang that's in power now. So if there are people like Zaluzhny, I think things will be more orderly. There won't be any significant progress in the country's development, but most likely people's rights will be more or less respected, in my opinion. But we don't know. Maybe Zelensky won't even run. Maybe Zaluzhny, if he makes it to the second round, or maybe we'll consider some other candidates.
Well,
I think that Zelensky now wants to make it so that many people have limited opportunities to run. For example, right now I've been living abroad for 3 years. Now they say that everyone who left is no longer Ukrainian. This way they'll be able to try. But I still think that our European colleagues, whoever they are, but they'll push this rule through, force it so that the restrictions are lifted. Otherwise, it's just absurd.
I agree. I often hear this argument too. But it says you can't run if you haven't lived in Ukraine for 10 years. Yes, I think it's 10 days that you lived in Ukraine.
The last one is for the president, I think.
Radio Tomso Spinnings. Now that we started talking with you, you started talking about the threat, about all this. We are in a somewhat similar situation. I can't help but remember Gennady Balashov, and just when we were arranging this broadcast with you, I found out that you actually talked to him. The whole terrible situation that started around him actually began a long time ago, with all these persecutions, and then in the summer, sanctions were imposed, and in the end, he was no longer with us. What's your take on this?
I've known him for a long time. Well, many people in the city of Dnipro knew him. I studied at the university there back in the 90s, how he started his business, those department stores, the underground passages turned into shops. He renovated everything, rented it out. Basically, well, I respected him. He was an energetic person, a real entrepreneur, but then he revealed his true self. As a politician, I don't always agree with his views. We often talked on the phone for a long time, and we had a few joint broadcasts. Well, I didn't always fully agree with his libertarian or liberal position, because I still have certain patriotic nationalist views which have now been distorted. I don't want to associate myself with any nationalist movement right now. Definitely not with the Svoboda Party or Azov or anyone else. I have my own opinions. I could argue with him a little, but I liked his economic model, creating a tax haven there, attracting investments that appealed to me. And then, well, not right away, but after some time had passed, Zelensky imposed sanctions against him, and even against Poroshenko there were sanctions. But I still supported Poroshenko in this position. First of all, it's illegal. This indicates that we don't have the rule of law. We don't have judges. He didn't go to court, didn't involve law enforcement agencies. There's no transparency in this process. Zelensky just takes and tries to destroy his political opponents, and against Hennedy as well. We consulted on how to properly challenge all these issues. But you see, even Poroshenko, having some apparatus, mechanisms, resources, lawyers, attorneys, still hasn't managed to bring it to a logical conclusion and get the appropriate decision. That's why in his last weeks before his death, you could feel the tension and disappointment in the state. But he fought, he kept going. You see, he somehow tried to adjust himself, but I think all that stress still got to him. They just brought him down. What happened with his heart, or what exactly happened? It's the death of such a person, an interesting person, an intellectually developed person with fascinating ideas. Also on Zelensky, purely on Zelensky, if it weren't for these sanctions, if they hadn't pressured him with these criminal cases and property seizures, the person would have just lived their life. And we would have listened, because each of us, for example, who is politically active, not just I expressed something from within myself. I listened to one person, another, a third, and formed my own opinion where someone will lead. And for me, let's say it was pleasant to hear that. Now, I believe that we have lost a very important person in the social and political life of our country, someone who was interesting to listen to.
And how calmly Europe looked at all of this, which tries to teach everyone about democracy. I used to be so naive, I thought everything was so simple. They watched as sanctions were imposed, clearly on political opponents, absolutely without evidence, not even for the sake of appearances. Some kind of SBU press conference on the screen, some videos, some audio recordings, some documents. I just don't like these sanctions. When I started seeing this, I was just shocked.
Thank you. You know, I handed over certain documents related to human rights violations. They concern Zelensky's treason. I handed them over in the UK. I handed them over to the government through MI6 in Spain. Maybe that's possible, or they were just pretending to be fools, I don't know. So nothing happened and nothing went anywhere, because those people from the UK called me. Do you remember the top minister of defense they wanted to send as ambassador to the United Kingdom?
Yes, yes.
I have correspondence officially confirmed. I published it on my page. You need to give an agreement there, approval for the appointment of the ambassador. They replied they'll consider my information but didn't approve him. I shared details on where he launders money, the countries involved, his construction activities, Reznikov. Sadly, neither Nabu nor anyone else has shown interest in this information. But then the English took it up, but on different grounds. They told me in English, how do I put it correctly now? We cannot continue our relationship because the relationship with Ukraine will be compromised. Ukrainian authorities, we cannot continue communicating with you because if we do, we will have problems. Communication with the Ukrainian authorities, that's how it sounded, and the same thing happened. And the Spaniards just gave up, they just ran away. Well, that's how it turned out. I realized there was no one to turn to there. They only reach certain mid-level tiers. Everyone is outraged that this is happening, that their money is being stolen. But as soon as it reaches the very top leadership of the state, they have a different rationale. You fight, we will provide, steal, fight. The main thing is to weaken Russia. That's what they want. Spill your blood.
It seems so. That is a kind of silent consent. It's wrong, it's lawlessness, we know it, but it benefits us. Well, roughly speaking, yes, yes.
I think if these are political players with experience, this has been going on since imperial times. It's always been like this. Geopolitics is like that. You shouldn't just idolize the European Union thinking everything is great here. You need to take this into account and understand the consequences. The same European state integration. Well, yes, the capital market, the labor market, the absence of borders, this is good. We support this. But the idea that everything will immediately change, that the rule of law will appear, that's up to us. That's our homework. It depends more on us. Who will lead the law enforcement agencies? Who will be the prosecutor general? Who will be the president? But I actually advocate for abolishing the position of president altogether. There is no successful experience. We should elect a prime minister in parliament. And if he is not capable, then half a year, and goodbye. Bring in a new one, a new one. I think Italy is a good example. How many times in the last century, about 50 times, I think, they held elections and cleaned house, ridding themselves of those mafias and all that influence, and somehow reached a certain standard of living. Many of us want to live there now.
But you see, that's Italy. That's old money. That's culture. That's something they earned a long time ago. This idea is common now. But I started looking for examples of a country that managed to carry out reforms in a parliamentary system. And besides Margaret Thatcher, I couldn't think of anyone. So it's already a wealthy country where maybe you just need to change the facade a little bit, but to radically get a country back on its feet and make radical reforms, in practice, only presidents do that. I'm not saying it's wrong. It should be discussed and considered, but I don't think it's the solution.
We need to find and elect such a person then. I don't see anyone like that in the near future. This means that we might return to the topic of a strong presidency someday. Right now, it would be usurpation, and that would be terrible.
Given today's events, it's worth discussing, Vitalii, and we've already talked a lot. And right now, many people feel this way, as I notice, even though it seems like optimists are watching me, I try to give people hope, but many are already disappointed in everything. They don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, what the future of Ukraine will be. People ask, Dennis, do we have a chance? And they ask you, Vitalii, do we have a chance? I believe we do.
Of course we do. That's why I work for this. I want to return to public and political life, to run for office and to hold positions in the government. Definitely, I still have time. I'm only 52 years old. Look at Trump, his age. I still have 30 years to work for Ukraine. The only thing is, I think the situation with Iran will eventually end, and Trump will still have to return to the issue of peace in Ukraine. And before the Canadian and congressional elections, there will be some changes. I'm sure of it. Otherwise, there will have to be some kind of statement about something. There is a chance that they might lose seats, the Republicans, so there will be some kind of result. Even if a long-lasting peace can't be achieved, there will still be something like a ceasefire. And maybe to show the public that Zelensky really doesn't want this, and that's their problem. But also to show that they stole money, or to shift the responsibility onto someone else.
That could be.
Why not?
You beat me to it. You said you want to return to Ukraine to live and be involved in politics. That was my last question. And what, if you can say, do you personally see as the conditions for your return, after which you think, okay, now it's possible to come back or at least start thinking about it? Well, I
left because I had two problems. The TCC, well, that's what they were called, but in reality, it was the SBU, and they had that authority. Well, that's how it was there. Yes, regarding mobilization, if I hadn't served, if I didn't have those medical issues, I've already received a court decision. It's quite interesting. I was seeking money in that case. They didn't pay me the final amount, and there's no statute of limitations on this. So I filed specifically about the money, but the court didn't grant me the money. But in the reasoning part, he described my service. So you can't just, take and say that I was dodging or something like that anymore, right? The court has already established the facts. I served with them in the armed forces of Ukraine. Now it may be easier for me. I might return or continue. Our courts are just like this now. I'm considering what to do when the territorial recruitment center can't grab people on the street anymore, along with my second and third options. I need to see if there will be presidential elections right away, whether I will take part in any format, either as part of someone's team or maybe on my own, with coverage of what's happening, directing people's thoughts in a certain direction. Then I might return to take part in the elections, but of course, safety is my number one concern right now. I'll have to get security then, like before, because Zelensky, he's also vengeful. They'll want to get revenge. That's just how it is.
That's a fact. That's a fact. I see. I see. Thank you very much. I think people got a huge amount of information and a different opinion. In many ways, we agree on some things, have different thoughts on others, but the main thing is to show the discussion. You know, it really outrages me that there's no public discussion. They destroyed all freedom of speech, any discussion, and put people in this bubble of propaganda and brainwashing. Freedom of speech is the foundation of democracy.
Yes, if you ever want to figure out how and why it happened, the surrender of Ukraine at the beginning of the invasion, the question of betrayal. I still have this complaint with Honcharенko. It's 27 pages long. So we can, on some show, gradually, step by step, figure out what happened and why no one has been punished. Excuse me, Zaluzhny, Budanov, everyone is there. Like I said, I was in the military. I was close to them. I have letters to Zelensky, to the commander-in-chief on the eve of the invasion, where I demanded and said that Ukraine was not ready. The law on national resistance had not been implemented. The headquarters were not deployed. The volunteer territorial defense units had not been created. I wrote a lot, and when I joined the service, my commander called me and said, Vitalii Mykolaiovich, your complaint to the president was sent to me to carry out, so go and do it. You see, it's an absurd situation. I mean, I carried out my own complaint. Zelensky received a response from the commander-in-chief regarding Kupriy's complaint, and the person responsible for carrying it out was Kuprii. You see, yes, it's absurd. All the heads of regional state administrations and military administrations were brought together with me. I spoke with all of them. I contacted the president's office directly on this, since Kirill Tymoshenko, whom I had known for a long time, was coordinating at the time. That means all the heads of law enforcement agencies, including Venediktova, who was the prosecutor general at that time, and Sukachov from the State Bureau of Investigation. All of us communicated because I was responsible for a very important area. This is a volunteer formation. It's 100,000 people, you understand. Someone killed someone. There was crossfire somewhere. Something happened somewhere. And these issues kept coming up. And I have very strong evidence, which points to Zelensky and his inner circle. I will testify to this in court, but I don't want to stay silent. I want everyone to know.
Agreed. This is an interesting topic and people will be interested. That's definitely good. A lot. Thanks for having me on.
Goodbye to you too.